Welcome to our Indiaspora virtual event on mental health, sifting through the stigma. It's a very, very important topic, as I don't need to tell anyone on this call or at this event. Let me take a moment to quickly introduce Indiaspora before I turn it over to the people that we really want to hear from today, our esteemed panelists, and we do have a great panel. My name is Sanjeev Joshipura. I'm the executive director of Indiaspora, and I live just outside of Washington, D.C. Indiaspora is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2012, so 11 years ago. And our mission is to inspire and position the global Indian diaspora to be a force for good and to build bridges among various diaspora leaders in different professions across several countries with leaders resident in India. And there are a few specific areas that we work on, which I'll cover at a 50,000-foot level before we dig in a little deeper to the topic that's most relevant for today. We work on philanthropy and social impact, philanthropy towards India, but also the idea of giving back where you live. And social impact is another way in which, of course, we give back, for example, by hosting conversations like the one today, civic engagement, allying with other communities, political engagement in a nonpartisan manner. These are some of the areas that we work on in that first bucket. The second area is entrepreneurship and innovation. And as a nonprofit, we are not a consulting bank, a consulting firm, or an investment bank, obviously. We believe strongly in the nonprofit motive, in the entrepreneurial motive, as a means to create jobs and as a means to solve societal problems. And there's a lot of work we do internationally and domestically here within the United States, in India as well, in the entrepreneurship and innovation area. The third area we work on is called Diaspora Next, which is about the next gen of the diaspora, engaging the next gen. We want to make sure, of course, that our ties with the Indian diaspora around the world and with India sustain over time. And the fourth and last area is what we call our Global Connect program. Indiaspora is very active in 8 countries: the United States, India, Australia, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, UK, and Canada. And we are in the process of building relationships with the top Indian diaspora across different fields in about 30 other countries. And we just had our G20 event on the sidelines of India's G20 presidency in New Delhi, where there were 300 diaspora leaders from 26 countries present at that event, talking about a wide range of subjects. Within the Global Connect area, we focus extensively on climate and bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. So that, in a nutshell, really is Indiaspora. But today's event, like I mentioned, is about mental health. And it falls squarely within our civic engagement, social impact bucket that one of my colleagues that you'll hear from a little later today, Shobha Vishwanathan, leads. She's based in New York, and you'll hear from her a little bit later, like I said. But, this is a topic that even our Surgeon General, who happens to be Indian American, Vivek Murthy, has spoken about extensively. Indiaspora has hosted previous events and conversations and panels on this subject. And today, we are delighted to welcome a stellar panel. So without further ado, let's get to them. I'll just introduce our moderator, who we've known for a while in many different avatars. He has a very impressive resume and background. But suffice it to say for today that Mitul Desai is the CEO and co-founder of CureHack, and he's a mental health entrepreneur. So Mitul, let me turn it over to you to take this program forward.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, and thank you to Indiaspora for highlighting this really important topic. And thanks to all the attendees for showing up. We really look forward to hearing from you in the Q&A session. So as Sanjeev said, I'm Mitul, I'm your moderator. I'll just gonna give a quick kind of thumbnail sketch, a roadmap of the issues we want to cover in the panel. I'll cover the bios of the panelists, and then we'll get right into it. So the objectives of the panel are really threefold. First is we want to cover stigma and the negative consequences of stigma. Stigma is not an abstract issue. It can actually act as a tangible blocker for people receiving the care and treatment that they deserve. We'll also cover related issues like the model minority myth and the pressures for assimilation that can actually exacerbate stigma. The second objective is we'll then move to solutioning. Based on the different perspectives of our panel speakers, we'll cover tools and strategies that we can use as individuals, as families, as a community to dismantle stigma. And then lastly, very importantly, we want to hear from you. As you start to hear the conversation progress and questions or ideas come to your mind, jot them down, throw them in the chat. There's no question that's too simple or off limits. The whole point of this discussion is to actually have an open venue for discussing these topics. So let's go into the bios very quickly. We are very lucky, as Sanjeev said, to have an incredible spectrum of folks from the world of art and medicine and advocacy and more. And so I'm just going to go alphabetically and give you backgrounds of our folks. So first, Dr. Priyachari, she's an assistant professor at the Stanford School of Medicine. She's also a licensed clinical psychologist who happens to treat a lot of young folks, including South Asians, in her clinic. You know, you just have to read the news and you can see that youth mental health is in full-blown crisis mode in this country. And Dr. Priyachari is on the front lines and she'll report back on what she's seeing. Prachi Gupta is an award-winning journalist turned author who just published her memoir entitled "They Called Us Exceptional and Other Lies That Raised Us." It is a deeply moving and powerful and brave book that tells her family's story, including their experience with mental health challenges. Chaku Matai is a community leader, a consultant, and an advocate who serves on multiple boards and works directly with organizations like On Track New York to lift up those who struggle with mental illness. Chaku is an experienced professional who also happens to have his own personal experience with mental illness. And so we'll discuss that and other areas in which he brings his sort of purpose and compassion to his work. And quickly, I'm a former lawyer and finance guy, now turned mental health advocate and entrepreneur. So with that, stigma. So stigma feels sometimes at once like a big kind of all-encompassing and vague word. So let's put some definition around it. So stigma actually exists at multiple levels. There's self-stigma, which can cause people to have shame and even deny that they have a condition. There's institutional or structural stigma, which are policies and procedures that disadvantage people with mental health conditions. And then there's societal stigma, which are basically broad public attitudes that, or stereotypes that limit public support for mental health resources. Each of these manifestations of stigma stand in the way of the treatment and care that people deserve. So Priya, if I could bring you in first, you know, as the resident medical practitioner on the panel, you see the system level every day when you go to work and the institutional level. You also see patients and families. But you've spoken, and last time we spoke, you've talked about the lack of data on South Asian Americans and mental health and the negative downstream effects that can have, which feels like a sort of institutional type stigma that we need to address. So I'd love to hear you discuss more about that and any other issues you see at the system level.
Sure. So I think, I mean, this is something what you're referring to is something we call South Asian exclusion. So in the US Census, we all identify as Asians. We fall into that broader bucket. We know, you know, all of us know that Asian is a very heterogeneous term, covers people of a lot of different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds, and so on. And so often in that mix, the South Asian population gets left out. So even though we identify as Asian, most people in the US don't think of, when they hear the word Asian, they don't think of South Asians. And that actually, you know, trickles into the research domain as well. So when you look at, you know, papers about Asian American mental health, most of them are focused on people from East Asia, not on people from South Asia. And we know that while there are a lot of similarities, sort of pan-Asian similarities, you know, South Asians are a different group. And even within South Asians, I mean, we're very, very diverse in terms of religion and, you know, language and culture and food and so on. And so there's actually this exclusion. And so we actually don't have a lot of good data on the South Asian experience, especially when it relates to mental health. And that, from a systemic level, and then that sort of, I think, feeds into this idea that, oh, we don't have mental health issues in our community because nobody's hearing numbers, nobody's hearing about this. And so, we don't have some of that data which we might be able to use to advocate for better services, more culturally informed services, and so on. So that's my big pitch.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I mean, it's basically you can't fix what you're not measuring, right? And it sounds like what you're saying also is we don't have an accurate sense of the scale of the problem and the different dimensions of it within our community, which is certainly a negative consequence of a sort of institutional blind spot, so to speak. So Chaku, would love to turn to you next. As someone with lived experience, who now also works at the system level, you kind of have a multidimensional view of stigma, right? And you've spoken so powerfully also about how the pressures of assimilation when you were growing up only exacerbated stigma. So I'd love to bring you in and maybe share with us how stigma showed up and acted as a blocker in your personal journey.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone in Indiaspora and all of you for organizing this opportunity. So for me and my family, we immigrated to the United States in '72. New York City, then upstate to Rochester. And at the time, the short version is, the Kodak wasn't hiring any people of color. They had just struck a deal with the Fight Coalition, which was a focused coalition on hiring Black people in Kodak and other industries in Rochester. And there was great resentment about any people of color coming into the area, whether it was moving into the neighborhood, whether it was taking jobs. So the xenophobia, the anger, the resentment, the racism that was so immediate, the tension was so high that it was really directed at my family and others right away. Myself, I would hear people go back to where you came from, where are you coming from, these kinds of attitudes. So when we talk about stigma, it's hard for me because I find it as more of a euphemism for oppression. All of the things that you described it is an attitude, as you described it, right? A bias and a bigotry that ultimately blames the individual for problems that society has created very powerful policies around, and creates belief systems that there's something wrong with you when you resist those ideas. So when a community is just trying to be present and show up with, as Khalil Gibran would say, without folding one's wings or lowering your head, when white supremacy faces that, there's a struggle. And so I internalized all of that, I guess is what I'm saying, and started to feel unsafe. Was my focus on fighting those indignities was just that. I fought with a raised fist, with a loud mouth, with ways that I even had a teacher say, East Indians aren't supposed to act this way. How do you, and they had these very interesting ideas about how I was supposed to act, because of who they thought, we were. And they even changed my name. They said he'll assimilate better, let's not call him Chaku. Chakapurukul is our, Malayalam name. But let's call him Terry. They came, and everyone started to come to America, and that generation with an American name and an Indian name. So I bring all of that up in the context of stigma because the very conditions that I was experiencing also resulted in conditions within me where the very language of my parents speaking Malayalam, which used to soothe me in the late evenings and early mornings, now were starting to sound like plots against me. And I started to feel unsafe in the house, just like I was feeling unsafe at school and feeling unsafe on the street. Now I was thinking they were trying to get rid of me and they were trying to kill me. And a voice started to tell me my mother's food while she was staring at me while I was eating, that she was watching to see if the poison was working, you know? And so now the focus becomes me as opposed to everything else. So I want to start with that context and how the school system and everything else kind of wrapped around that. And, you know, so I wonder how these social determinants, and I think Vivek recognized that in the Surgeon General, you know, in the reports, we've kind of recognized that from very early on, but we've never really addressed it from an impact on our community in this way and reflection on it in a more direct way until books like Prachi's. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you, my friend, for
Thank you.
sharing your story.
Yeah.
My family also has experience with serious mental illness and schizophrenia, and so I empathize with you. And you know, I really love what you said at the very beginning, which is stigma can sometimes feel like a euphemism or a nice word for discrimination or oppression, even more bluntly, because that is really the effect that it has. It excludes and compartmentalizes people and frankly puts them to the side of society simply because of a disease or a diagnosis that they have. And that is the very definition of discrimination, right? Mistreating people based on their identity. So, so thank you, very powerful. Prachi, you speak so powerfully and eloquently about many things, including the model minority myth and how that can serve to exacerbate stigma and only heighten the reluctance of families to speak amongst themselves, to share their stories and get the help they need. So if you will, please share with us your perspective on the sort of intersection between the model minority myth and stigma and what that all sort of leads to.
Yeah, so you know, the model minority myth is this really, we talk about it in such abstract terms. I mean, you know, everything that we read about regarding the myth talks about these big ideas, but I think it's easy to forget that at the end of the day, it has a real severe impact and serious impact on us as individuals. So it is a systemic problem, but it ultimately affects us all as individuals. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do with my book was show how this myth has flattened us and has flattened me and my ability to understand who I was and my ability to relate to everybody in my family and really how we saw each other and the pressure of this myth. I think, I mean, all of us, it sounds like we can probably relate to what that pressure feels like, but when we are living in it, there are, you know, as Priya mentioned, like there's not even a lot of research to quantify or verify or explain what it feels like. And so that adds to this burden, and then it adds to this feeling of, is it all in my head? Am I just imagining this? Is this even a real problem? And that feeling is what makes it so hard to even say anything, even talk about it, even think about, what does help look like? Do I even need help? Like, because you know, growing up, I felt very isolated by these questions and these experiences. And so the model minority myth really adds to all of that pressure. And it also creates this very narrow role and set of expectations, you know, like what Chaku said about even the teacher who made that comment to you about how East Indians are supposed to be there. We are so, I think so many of us we grow up triangulating our identities as members of a diaspora, as people who are trying to fit in within white American contexts. And for me personally, not for most of my life, not having access to a large Indian community. And when I did, it was very homogenous, and we sort of all felt pressure to, do the same things, like be the same way. And it really, a lot of it came from this myth, this pressure to, to present a certain way, to present ourselves as perfect for the purpose of feeling as if we could belong or assimilate within society. And that has an enormous psychological impact, one that we are still learning about, but it doesn't, the fact that we're still learning about it doesn't negate the fact that it's real and it's affecting people every day right now.
Yes, so powerfully said. Model minority myth is kind of like the word stigma itself. It's used a lot, and I think people don't really fully understand A, what it means, or B, what the impact is. So for sure. And we haven't even talked about at the system level sort of the lack of culturally competent providers, or the overemphasis on medication and treatment. Obviously, medication and treatment certainly has a role and is very important in stabilizing folks. But if you want to get to recovery, there are all sorts of non-medical interventions that are also important, like psychosocial rehabilitation and peer support, where the importance of culturally competent approaches becomes in some ways even more important when you talk about peer support and things like that. And I know, Chaku, you have spoken about that so powerfully. So, look, it's clear that stigma manifests in multiple ways, and each time it presents itself, it acts as a real world obstacle to individuals receiving the care, the treatment, and the dignity that they deserve. Let's now move to kind of the solutioning side of this. So, Priya, I know you work a lot with young folks, and because they are young, you have to necessarily involve families. And so you kind of see this at a holistic kind of family level. What are some approaches that you've seen that have worked and have enabled or sort of encouraged families to come forward and seek care and stay engaged in care?
So one of the things we were noticing is, so I work at a specialty clinic for people with early in the process of psychosis. And what we're finding is that we find a lot of young South Asian coming to our clinic, not so much in, our sister clinics, that we help people with anxiety and depression and so on. And if you look at their trajectory, we're trying to, talk to the parents and understand what brings them in. I think when somebody complains, this sort of ties into that model minority myth as well, right? So young person says, I'm struggling with school, I'm finding it hard to sleep, I'm feeling stressed. The average response, at least, I see people from a clinical sample, so, I might be biased, but, from my perspective, parents say, oh, suck it up, deal with it, work harder, do your homework, don't spend as much time playing with your friends or on video games or whatever. And it's only when things get to that point, when they hear words like psychosis, then parents have no understanding of what's going on with their child. And now they think it's some other beast. Psychosis really is not that different from anxiety. It's just, anxiety to a, more extreme. And so really, we spend a lot of time educating parents to become advocates for their children. And again, something you touched upon was, the treatment system is not always right, doesn't know all the answers. And so, we really encourage parents as well as the kids to, advocate for their own treatment, whatever works best for them. We try and offer them a combination of, treatments. It's not always medication based, so on. So, one other thing that, slightly off topic that comes up, many of our South Asian languages don't actually have literally the language to talk about mental health issues. We talk about, happy, sad. I'm a native speaker of Tamil. I could say, I'm angry or sad or, happy, but I really wouldn't be able to tell the difference between being sad and being depressed, being sad because whatever, I didn't get to go to a show today. I didn't get tickets for something versus, something that might be more serious. So I think we actually literally don't have the language to talk about these things. And so we empower parents in terms of talking about this. We also encourage them to reach out to other people, peer support, really important, because we have families that come in where, parents have not talked to anybody, including, their close family members about, what their child is going through. And it's this, again, this ties back into stigma, right? It's like, it's this thing that, oh my God, I can't talk about this because this is going to make things worse. Well, it actually will make things better, because you'll realize that a lot of your friends have had similar experiences, and maybe, you're not as alone as it seems. With this, there's this expectation from the outside in terms of being like perfect, as well as expectation even from within of saying, if something is not perfect, then I can't talk about it. And the clash really causes a lot of problems. So we do a lot of education with parents and support for them to, reach out and provide resources for them.
That's wonderful. That the community and peer support is so powerful to address an experience which can often feel very isolating, as you alluded to, right? You literally can feel like you're alone, not just the individual, but the family as well. And so that peer support and community building in there is so important. So on the education piece, Priya, if I could draw you out a little bit more, the importance of early identification and intervention is probably heightened in the case of mental health. If you find the individual early enough, your chances of full recovery go up, many fold. And so how can the community, how can people listening, how can providers, the system help drive more of that public awareness and education, so that when families start to see signs, they know to immediately go to a provider? Because again, the importance of early identification is cannot be emphasized enough.
So, typically we tell people that, if you notice anything different for you or for your child, then, you might want to talk to somebody about it. It doesn't mean that you're going to get medication. So, and when I say different, what does that mean? If somebody who's really gregarious is not as chatty anymore, is sort of withdrawing more, if somebody's sleep cycles are changed, if somebody's, appetites have changed, somebody's more irritable, again, encourage them to reach out to somebody. It might be hard for somebody to talk to their family member about what's going on, especially, in our community, because, especially children often pick up very quickly, on parents' attitudes about mental health issues. And so, they may not feel comfortable talking about this. So, encourage them to reach out to a trusted adult. It could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a friend's parent, somebody that they can talk to that, might be able to help guide them. Again, it doesn't mean that they're going to get medication. It doesn't mean that they need treatment per se, but even sometimes just even talking about these difficulties might be really helpful. Reach out for support, and, really just anything that seems different from what's usual for that person. We don't want to pathologize things that, if somebody is quiet, we don't want to pathologize it. We don't expect everybody to be, type A personality, running about, climbing, corporate ladders. But, if somebody is you see a change in somebody's functioning, then, I would, recommend that reach out for, talk to somebody who knows about it.
So helpful, so helpful. Yes, we don't want to pathologize, but also, it's important to sort of observe and raise issues as they come up. And sometimes it's okay to err on the side of raising the issues at the risk of potentially, you don't want to miss it, because again, if you do, it can lead to long-term issues. So Chuck,
if I could add
yeah.
one more thing, again, there's this big, discussion in the field about culturally similar, treatment providers, and, there's arguments on both sides. So something that can be really helpful with finding somebody who at least understands your culture is that things that might be normal in your culture would not be pathologized. So, let me give you an example, right? We had somebody who came to our clinic, young South Asian person, who was seen by, some of my colleagues. And, this is somebody, they said, oh, it seems to be getting worse because, this young woman is really paranoid that, her family is, doing things to her. I happened to meet her, and she talked about her mother-in-law and her sister-in-law, like keeping close tabs on her. Again, there's a part of my, South Asian background where, that sort of rings bells. And it turns out actually there was a domestic violence situation going on. Yes, she had some other issues, but, that was something that was missed because it seemed so absurd to, some of my colleagues that, why would a mother-in-law like interfere in, her life that way? Not to knock mothers-in-law, there's some wonderful ones, but, I mean, that's the sort of thing, there's some cultural piece that, sometimes the bells ring.
Fascinating, fascinating. That and the example of some South Asian languages not even having the words to describe some of these diagnoses just tells you how nuanced and sometimes community specific this issue can be. Thank you. Chaku, so you're such a brave and a moving advocate, and you work on so many different levels, serving on boards, acting as a consultant, working on the ground with organizations like On Track New York. Share with us, if you could, an example of maybe how sharing your story or empowering others to share their story led to sort of dismantling of stigma and the opening up of seeking treatment and care. And a related note, since we're in the solutions part of the discussion, I'd love to hear your thoughts also on the importance of non-medical interventions like peer support and psychosocial rehabilitation. So we'd love your thoughts on both those topics.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you. And I think this, I think where I want to start is this idea that when I was struggling, my parents didn't know what to do, right? And just let's kind of start very simply. They watched, like you said, changes going on for me that they couldn't explain, and turning to anyone else when they were the ones bringing everyone to this country, for example, right, sponsoring everyone. They were seen as the leaders of the community, the patriarchs and matriarchs of our family. There was no way they could reveal any weakness, or negative experiences, or maybe it was also just not wanting to put attention on them while other people had needs as well. But at the same time, they were also working a lot and trying to get our own lives up. And so they were just hoping I would be able to survive, and make it through some things. In terms of the opportunity for what my parents wanted, what they wanted was for me to be able to be happy, right? So when my father, had me in the hospital, and I'm 15 years old, I just tried to kill myself. I've used drugs. Police are trying to find me. There's all kinds of pain going around. Now he can't escape it. He finally tells someone else that that what's going on, and this person also said, "Me too. My son's also been struggling like this." So we did something. This man tells him how they created a new situation for young people where they renovated a building, threw some sofas in it, a ping pong table and a pool table, and gave it to the kids to support themselves. This wasn't a treatment program, but it was there for people who were coming out of treatment or before treatment, or to engage the families. It was kind of a in lieu of, or maybe before, during, and after support, right? And so they took me there, and that was the approach that they found I would engage. I wasn't, and they weren't willing to engage much of the system as much as I wasn't, because a lot of times, like Priya said, the system was very quick to over-medicate. Our own people sometimes were very quick to pathologize. Indian psychiatrists were very quick to have a solution that didn't quite work for us either, They knew certain things would work for me, but they couldn't reach me because I didn't trust them either. So that was the main issue, was how do we establish some communication? So I don't know, I can't remember your first question already, if it was the non-medical or
Yeah, you touched on both of them. I mean, I asked about the power of sharing stories. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
for others to come forward and normalize these discussions. Yeah.
So when I started talking about what I was experiencing with with my family, it was actually coming across as critiques of our culture, right? critiques of various aspects of oppression that I saw within our culture. I was speaking to things that I thought were needing to be talked about, but our culture couldn't talk about it and wouldn't talk about it at times, you know. So that was what I was looking for, was some alignment around what I was seeing and hearing and understanding. When I heard other people telling their stories, including my family, when they went to other groups like NAMI support groups that they were recommended to go to, they would hear a narrative that wasn't quite theirs. They would hear a master narrative of how people were supposed to heal, how people were supposed to identify as having an illness, but it wasn't their story. And I was experiencing the same thing. So being the first to try to tell my story in a way that connected with what I saw allowed other people to start to do the same thing. There was a collective critical consciousness that started to occur among a small group of us, you know? And so for us as ex-patients, for example, I would literally have to sneak into a psych ward at Rochester Psychiatric Center because a tech let me in, and do a peer support meeting in a closet where nobody would know we were there. Or another group, a therapist led me in to speak to the young people in her program on the Hill, they were always in seclusion and restrained. And the conversation they thought I was going to have was about illness and recovery. But the conversation I was having with them was about power and who had it and what we found ourselves doing to take it back. And how even that didn't work for us.
I mean, that all started, right, because you did the simple but very brave act of sharing your story. And sometimes that's all it takes. So thank you for that. And you know, just to quickly sort of underscore the importance of peer support, and things called psychosocial rehabilitation, you know, there are many aspects of chronic mental illness, and obviously Priya here is the expert, but having worked in this field for almost 5 years now, you know, what chronic mental illnesses in particular do is take away the things that we all need and use to thrive on a daily basis: dignity and hope and aspiration and school and jobs and friends and family, and all those things really can't be cured by medication or therapy. What you need actually are peers and community centers and, you know, clubhouses and support groups and things like that. So all that stuff is really, really important. And again, for culturally competent versions of that, even more powerful. So Prachi, as the most skilled storyteller here, would love to hear your view on the importance and the power of storytelling, and maybe even at a more macro level, the power of art to kind of move and change hearts and minds on a complex, kind of frozen issue like stigma that's been around forever.
Yeah, so I guess I mean, my response to that, I think, is actually a little bit more personal, because you know, my story is that I was raised in a very high achieving household that was, you know, my dad is a surgeon. My brother and I when we graduated college, we had great white collar jobs. He was at Intel. I went into a management consulting firm. Obviously, I'm no longer a management consultant. And but for all my life, I knew that I wanted to be a writer and a painter. I'm an artist, and I've known that deeply since I was about 6 years old. I mean, I was like, the first time I got like crayons, my grandparents loved to remind me that I just went nuts on their walls, and they had to paint them over. And then I got a hold of crayons again, and I did it again, and then they had to paint it over again. And that's just always been who I am. But for so long, I was raised in a household where that wasn't really okay. It was okay as a hobby, but when it came time to get serious about what I was going to study and what I was going to pursue academically, it was not okay. And so I tried really, really, really hard to fit this mold. You know, I wasn't ever going to be able to be a doctor. I don't think I had the discipline to do that, or, you know, probably like that kind of intelligence. And I knew I wasn't going to probably go into law or anything else. So like, I was like, okay, I think management consulting is something that I'd be interested in. And what I discovered was that I was absolutely miserable. And when I saw all around me as this was happening, my brother, so unlike me, like I rebelled in high school, and I was that artist, and that I was an athlete, and I just like I didn't fit the mold of what I was supposed to do. And that rebellion taught me, though, that if I fail, I will, I did terribly in school, in high school. And so like, if I fail, I will actually be okay. But my brother sort of had the opposite experience, where he was just innately really talented at math and science. And in high school, he was taking advanced math classes at a local university. He was offered a job at SpaceX after an internship, and he turned it down because he actually had a psychotic break that summer, and was diagnosed with psychotic depression that nearly took his life at the time. And he went to Carnegie Mellon. He still graduated. He missed an entire semester. He still graduated from college on time with honors, despite missing 6 months due to a suicide attempt. And this was happening while I was in this job that was supposedly successful, but I was miserable. And I saw what that kind of desire for achievement and to be that good at something did to my brother and did to other members of my family. And I saw that, and I was like, you know what, this is not worth it. And also, I am not happy. I'm miserable in this job, where I know that there's this thing that I really love and that makes me feel alive. And I can't explain it. I don't know where it comes from. I didn't ask for this, but I was born like this, and I need to honor that, and I need to see where it can take me. And so I quit my job, and I had no backup plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I quit to basically be unemployed. Like, I worked at an unpaid internship for a new media startup that didn't go anywhere. And then 3 months later, I was on Craigslist looking for jobs. Like, it was a bad year. My parents were like, what, we didn't pay for your education for you to do this. Like, there was no guarantee that I was going to, make it. But I realized that there's something more important than that. And that success, we prioritize that so much in this country. And I think as immigrants and children of immigrants, we feel so much pressure to succeed, but it's in these very narrow terms. And art is what helped me retain that part of myself that was beyond what I could simply produce in the world. And I really credit that impulse and that deeper connection to something with maintaining my sanity for everything that I've gone through with my family, and everything that I witnessed and experienced. If I didn't have my art, I don't know where I'd be. And I really do believe that it is crucial to my survival, and to really most of our survivals, is this ability to connect to something deeper than ourselves, often through some form of expression. And storytelling is how we see our experiences in other people. Like, we can be so isolated, but stories really help us see ourselves and other people and experience. They really break that sense of loneliness. And so I just think that art and writing and any form of expression it really enables us to connect with each other. And so it's so vital for all of us.
So well said. Yeah, stories do so much, and especially when they're told from a place of authenticity and truth, like you've told in your book, the power is that much more, and its ability to change hearts and minds, and its potential to do that is so much more. So thank you for that. And I love the other point you made about broadening our definition of success. So important. There are many paths to success, and they don't all lie in, banking and consulting and law, as someone who's done at least two of those things in his past. So powerful. So we have some time for questions. I see a question or two in the chat. I'd love to maybe summarize some of these. There are so many important kind of calls to action or solution sets that we discussed, and would love to hear maybe closing thoughts from the panelists before we address one or two of the questions in the chat. So the first sounds very simple, but it's incredibly brave, and it gives permission to others to do the same, which is tell your story. Share your story. Do the work to know your story and then share it. It doesn't have to be in a book. It doesn't have to be public. It doesn't have to be some big dramatic thing. Just start by sharing your story. I went through that same process. I kept my family's story sort of hidden and secret for decades, really. And the minute I shifted that paradigm and started telling my story, I saw how it empowered others and really freed me to connect me to what is now my life's work. The second is listen when others are telling their story, right? As Priya said, early identification and intervention, super, super important. So especially if you're a parent or in any family, really educate yourself on some of these issues and try and listen for or observe signs. The second is some homework for Indiaspora. We talked about the lack of data on the South Asian American community, specifically in mental health. So perhaps Indiaspora can add that as well as some of these other issues to its advocacy platform when it goes down and engages on the Hill and other places. Broaden your definition of success. Life will be much more interesting. You will lead a much more authentic and happy life. Support artists. Buy Prachi's book. And last but not least, support the full range of treatment options, including things like family support, peer support, and other interventions. So let's go to some of these questions. There was a question I saw in the chat, which was about, so I'll just repeat the question. So is Indiaspora involved with organizations like National Alliance on Mental Illness or Mental Health America to start South Asian specific mental health support groups? So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if anyone from Indiaspora wants to weigh in, if they're doing that or considering that, or have any potential proposals on how to extend their activity in the mental health space.
I'll take a crack at answering it. It's a fairly straightforward answer at this point because we are not currently in any partnership or this thing, but it makes sense to explore it like we do other similar advocacy initiatives. So this conversation is partly a way of sort of getting a sense of where we are as a community, learning together and where we can move forward. So definitely this is something we can explore and see where it goes. And like you mentioned, Mithul, we will add it to our homework list of things to do.
I love it. We're already taking action. And I can tell you, as someone who's on the board of NAMI New York City, which is one of the largest chapters of the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, in a city like New York City, New York City is always looking for ways to connect with and partner with South Asian groups locally in New York City to, deliver their programs in a more culturally competent way. So NAMI is certainly an organization, depending on where you live, they have chapters all over the country. If you're interested, reach out to them. If you're in New York City, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about it. It's certainly something we need to do. And of course, Indiaspora at the national level can play a role.
Mithul, I feel compelled to
Please.
speak about something, if you don't mind, now that you're raising organizations like NAMI and Mental Health America. There are organizations like NAMI that have historically been supporting proposals that oppress us, right? So forced treatment is an example of that. The number of people of color that end up under forced treatment mechanisms has a solution when organizations like NAMI center themselves as family members over the voices of those of us who are actually identified as survivors and ex-patients, saying for ourselves that we have a different way. We found funding, NAMI was funded by, pharmaceutical companies and had interests that were far different than our own. We've made some progress. NAMI New York City is one of the organizations that has supported a change in forced treatment policies, for example. So I've appreciated that. But I think what I was trying to raise earlier was that there needs to be a critical consciousness among our community around the kinds of things we're advocating for. And so when you're telling your story, don't tell my story. You can tell yours. But, you know, my father and I did a presentation together, first time at Rochester Institute of Technology when I was 16, and we got into a fight right in front of everybody about what we were, and he had one idea and I had another, and I realized, wow, we can't do this until we're on the same page about a few things. So that didn't happen for another 10, 15 years. But the idea became we needed to spend some time co-analyzing and deconstructing what we've been told about ourselves. And I think there are some proposals like Mental Health America is supporting Medicaid access that includes peer support at a higher level. It expands the supports that might be available under Medicaid. Yet our community hasn't necessarily leveraged our power. When I say our community, our Indian community has not always leveraged our power towards the more marginalized communities among us, right? So police crisis is another one in New York. I'm working heavily on trying to change and remove the over-reliance of police in mental health crisis response and eliminate it. It needs to be stopped. And just because Indians aren't dying isn't why we shouldn't be there, right? So I've been upset about our lack of involvement at the most fundamental levels of centering the voices of those of us. Because at the end of the day, the stigma was actually about, I've been shunned by my family, even though I'm 37 years in this recovery process. I've been, you know, I can't get anybody in New Jersey to come to a presentation that I do because they just want me to stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for raising those issues. Yeah.
Thank you for letting me speak about it a little bit. I didn't want to.
Of course. Listen, those are really important issues. And I think, you know, we could almost have a whole nother panel discussion on that, but mental health is the classic intersectional issue because it touches on issues of criminal justice and racial justice and homelessness. And, you know, and oftentimes, particularly in media reports and by politicians, all those issues get convoluted and warped and end up further demonizing the people who actually need the help. And so really important set of issues. Chuck will appreciate that. So there's another question in the chat, which is, would each of you share your basis for defining mental wellness? Maybe Prachi, if you want to go first.
I was like, don't pick me first. I was like, Priya should go first. She can give you a clinical definition. Because to be honest, like I really struggle with what the idea, it's such a simple, like we use this term mental health all the time and mental illness all the time. But, you know, in the course of writing this book and thinking about my experiences and my family's experiences, I realized how subjective some of these things really are. And I was just like, but who determines, and I'm getting a little philosophical here, but you know, it goes back to something Chaku said earlier about like adjusting to a situation that's not normal. When we are made to adjust to something that's dysfunctional, or is that us being mentally ill, or is that us being mentally healthy and then getting used to a situation that is ill? So this is sort of the issue that I struggle with a lot when I think about mental health and the way that we talk about mental health in our current system versus the way I would like to envision it in the future. You know, so I really struggle with the idea of what is mental health in general and what does it mean to be well in this society that we have that is fundamentally, I think, not well and has so many issues. So I guess so this is why I was like, maybe I should go last. But you know, for me, I can only answer that personally. I guess it means feeling this sense of groundedness and inner peace and knowing that I have the power to come back to that whenever I want to. Learning how to do that in myself and regulating my nervous system and having a sort of a community, a support group and people who share in that experience so I'm not alone in my reality or in my version of reality, that I can share this world and my experiences with other people. And when I feel that sort of connectedness, both to myself and the world around me, then I feel as if I am well.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Priya, what's your definition of mental wellness?
I think it's sort of piggybacking on what Prachi said. I think I like to think of mental wellness sort of like the concept of happiness. Happiness is not happiness doesn't mean that we're actually feeling good all the time and that things are going well all the time. It's like, am I able to do the things that I want to be doing? Am I living my life the way I want to be, living? Am I, meeting whatever goals I have for my life? I think that's mental health, that if somebody is able to do that, I would think that they're, doing well. And again, to sort of not stigmatize the term, if somebody is struggling, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily ill or that they need treatment. It just means that, they might need a helping hand, like all of us do at various points in time.
And last but not least, Chaku, your definition of mental wellness.
Yes, so I have this inner world that I preferred a whole lot over the outer world. And in my inner world, there was a lot of what Prachi was describing. It's not about the absence of things. It was about the presence of things, like connection, of change, and of growth, and there's a current that I tap into there, that happens in this inner world. There are multiple voices that give me a different understanding of my consciousness in that world. So my ability to be connected to those things that result in maybe beautiful things and other times kind of not so beautiful feelings, like in art, Prachi, you're able to express those, right? I didn't find a way to express them in all the times, but the opportunity to actually express myself. I often say I'm a river, not a statue. So that means I'm going to look very different depending on the conditions that river is flowing in, sometimes it's a waterfall, sometimes it's a slow brook, sometimes it's quite ragey. You don't want to be there and try to swim in it, but all that is wellness for me. A friend of mine created this 8 dimensions of wellness. Her name is Peggy Swarbrick, Dr. Margaret Swarbrick. And those dimensions are quite powerful, everything from emotional and intellectual and vocational and, environmental, a lot of different ideas that we can reconceptualize wellness around, as opposed to just the absence of illness. Or it's not about, I don't want my voices to go away, just so you know.
Yes. I love that. I love that. I think what I heard common threads from all 3 of you is that, first of all, there is no overall health without mental health. We all have mental health. Mental health is different from mental illness. And just like your body, your physical body can ache from time to time, your brain hurts from time to time, and that's completely okay. And how we respond to that is unique to each of us. We have our own set of responses, whether they're individual and or community-based, and all of that is a-okay. The point is to identify it within yourself and have the strength to talk about it when you need to talk about it. And so that's incredibly important. So we are at time. And so I just want to thank the panelists for an incredible discussion. Again, we were so fortunate to have this cross-section of perspectives. Thank you to Indiaspora for spotlighting this really important issue. Hope this is the first of many more to come on this issue. As we discussed, mental health is not an isolated issue. It is relevant to so many other things that impact our community and the country at large. And thank you for all the attendees. I hope this was helpful, educational, inspirational for you. Appreciated the questions. Feel free to reach out to Indiaspora or to any of us if you want further information or want help. Happy to help in any way I can, and I'm sure the panelists feel the same. So thank you again. This is great.
Thank you, Mithil. It's time to wrap up, but I just want to quickly say, cannot thank you enough for all the panelists for the generosity of time that you gave to this issue and the promptness with which each of you responded when we reached out and asked you to be part of this panel. I heard this term earlier today in another context, and I'd like to use it here, this radical vulnerability that you all were willing to share. That is what makes this conversation so powerful, I think. And one of the exciting things about a platform like Indiaspora is that we get to have public conversations about important topics. And thanks for getting this started. And we all wish for finding ways to make this meaningful in different ways. And when we set out to do a program on mental health, I anticipated certain sets of things. You have truly blown my mind by taking this in so many different directions that there is a series on mental health possible now, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to the panelists, Chaku, Priya, Prachi. Let's stay in touch.
Take care. Bye.
Everybody.
You.